beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On this show, we're talking about being students on the embodied spiritual path. And what does that even mean? So what is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything? All the beauty and crazy, all the joys and the messes, all the bliss and the grit that is a human life. We'll be attempting to sort that out for ourselves here on the show. In today's episode, we are pondering if the law of attraction, a phrase I hate, as you will soon discover, or manifestation is a real thing, and whether it is or not, is it something to even turn our attention towards? So do we actually know what is in our own best interest? And what role does something larger, or whatever you want to call it, source, God, universe, what role does that play? And on the other hand, should we just collapse into a feeling of acceptance, or is there a way to expand into acceptance? Just a note before we head into the heart of the conversation, Vanessa and I do have potty mouths, so if there are kiddos around, please put in some headphones, and if profanity is not your thing, we apologize. Okay, here we go. All right, guys, we're giggling. I'm sorry. Hi, Vanessa, because we're trying to figure out how to start an episode. So I'm just going to start.
That sounds great. Let's dive in.
Let's do it. Okay. I have been thinking an awful lot for years, as you know, about all of this. I'm going to bias my conversation topic right away. All of this law of attraction shit.
Where do you stand
Seems
on
like you
that,
have an opinion.
Cliffhanger.
But here's what I would like to say. So I went through a phase, which I think very commonly for people when they go through a law of attraction phase. And for those of you listening who are really put off by this, I do apologize. I'm not trying to be a dickhead just for being a dickhead's sake. But what I would say is that when people throw themselves into that a lot, what I find is that they are in a place in their life that involves a fair amount of desperation. And so at the very least, not speaking for anyone else, this was my experience. I had this period of real desperation, and I did all of the reading of the law of attraction books. I still thought The Secret was bullshitty enough that wasn't my thing. Imagine a bicycle, bling, But I was intrigued, obviously, because I wanted to stop spinning my wheels and get out of desperation. And what I found was that because the foundation of that was desperation, what I did was build a lot of desperation. And so then I rejected that completely. And I, identify as Buddhist-ish, obviously. I have a lineage that I practice in. It's very important to me. And I've gone a lot the route of acceptance, noticing reality, accepting reality, falling in love with reality, all that stuff. And I'm still very much that way. However, I see recently that for me, I threw out the baby with the bathwater a little bit. So I'm kind of playing with that some. What are the ways that manifestation actually is a thing? So I have a lot of thoughts on that, obviously, and it's been a journey, but I know you and I talk about this some, so I'm curious where you're approaching it from too.
Sure. I have so many thoughts. It's probably fair enough for us to back up and kind of lay a question, which would be, is there such a thing as manifestation? And if there is it worthwhile on a spiritual path to focus on that? Because to me, I think actually those are two different questions. The first one is, does manifestation work? Is there kind of this thing called law of attraction that gets spoken about in actually many different spiritual traditions? And if there is it something that's worthwhile to put our attention to? Because that's also something I ponder. Where do we find that balancing act between accepting life and kind of pushing to make things happen? And that brings up a further question for me of, do we even know best? So I guess I'll start off just by bringing some of my ideas into the forum, and then we can go back and forth because I also have thought about this quite a bit. on the one hand, I, like you, have always focused more towards acceptance. When I saw the law of attraction and The Secret right off the bat, I actually liked I liked the movie, actually. I liked What the Bleep, and I liked looking at the idea of the way that molecules resonate together, because actually I believe that. So herein lies my conundrum. I actually believe that we can draw things towards us. Hence, I believe that there is some kind of mechanism around attraction. Where I find, let's say, conflict with this idea is twofold. One is the first thing that you mentioned, Brooke, which is I believe it is threefold. The first is I believe that it is our state of being, our state of mind, our state of energy, or one could say our state of feeling that actually is attracting. Yeah. So whenever we do it from a place of fear, a place of lack, a place of anger, I think that that's the seeds that we are planting. And that is actually a Buddhist idea, a karmic idea. I think that also we don't always know best. And if you look at the psychological research, they say that most people don't know what would make them happy. So it kind of keeps running this omnipotent idea that we create everything. We are the masters of our universe. If only we did it correctly, we could make ourselves abundantly happy. And too often it's about getting something that's outside of us. And it's too often about reinforcing this separate sense of self, i.e. Vanessa knows best and Vanessa should take the bull by the horns and create. And that leads me to the third dilemma I have with it, which is then when we can't, we start to feel bad about ourselves. And I see this actually in my client sessions a lot, surprisingly, that people start to think I'm doing something wrong. There's something the matter with me because, they'll like look on social media and see all these things like, if you want it, just create it. And they're like, well, then why am I the shitty person who like can't draw someone into my life? And I think an important thing we can bring into that part of the conversation is that we have some erroneous idea that we are separate and individual, and we are not. We are part of a collective. And so it's not just about an individual level of karma and manifestation. We're part of a system that allows for or invites or gives opportunity for. That's part of it. The second thing is it's a lot of hubris to think we even understand our unconscious.
Oh, God knows. Yeah. We don't know what we're running, actually, much of the time.
These are the programs. I mean, most of what we're attracting towards us are the old programs that are running underneath that conscious wish. So it's like what Mystic Girl in the City says, Kieran, who Brooke and I both speak to sometimes, which is like, life is almost like, she says, like as if you cracked open someone's body and you shine like a flashlight in, and then that light projects onto a movie screen. And that movie screen is your life. And it's a reflection of things that are like stored in the deep. Mm-hmm. And, let's face it, most of us are not aware of those hidden ooey gooey programs. And so how could we manifest other than that?
Yeah. And it gets to what you're talking about, that shame that's baked in is so intertwined with trying to create from our individual ego self, which is, I know what's good for me. What's good for me is a 3-bedroom house in my favorite neighborhood. I've been on Zillow a lot in the last few days.
I do want that.
I totally want that. But we don't know. We don't know what's good for us. And I think it was Marianne Williamson who had that. It's a mantra I've used over the years of just, I do not know what is in my own best interest. Like those moments where I start getting grabby hands, me wanty, and like, this is the thing. And instead of getting attached to that, really being able to open my hands, let go of my grasp and say, I don't know. I don't know what's in my own best interest. However, and this is where like the don't throw out the baby with the bathwater piece comes from for me, I do believe that there's such a thing as source, which is where we are all a collective and where whatever word you want to attach to it, but I'll use source for now. And source does flow through. It's what we are, but I think that we can have kinked hoses where source can't flow through. And again, it's that Buddhist idea of karma, in my opinion. That's what we're talking about, is that we've sown certain seeds, both good and bad, that are going to have a certain effect. And that if we can, the more we can bring those, whether you want to call them unconscious patterns or karma, to the surface and make them more workable and unkink the hoses, then source can actually flow through, I believe, less impeded. And this isn't about that shame idea of like, ooh, I've worked on my stuff more than you have. I'm more evolved than you are, because God, we all have, it's so silly to say because it's so obvious, but I think we need constant reminders. We all have trauma. We all have stories. We all have pain. We all suffer. And there is a large degree of that is that murky, hidden inside autopilot pattern that can't be workable if we can't see it, if we can't relate to it. So there is, and like Byron Katie has talked about this issue, of law of attraction versus the kind of stuff she does, which is called the work, which is, I think very helpful. And she says it's simply the difference between I can have what I want and I can want what I have. And I think that's a piece of it. I think that's a piece of the story, but not the whole story. Right.
And this is where it starts to get tricky, because the idea of just accepting your life scenario, again, it doesn't feel quite right. Viktor Frankl had said something like, if you can change something that's bothering you, change it. Otherwise, you're masochistic.
Yeah.
If you can't change it, accept it. Otherwise, you'll be, not at peace. And so there's something to that. Maybe last year sometime, I was in some kind of a ritual with a friend of mine leading it, and I don't know, she was doing something about water and the elements, and she said something like, make a wish for what you want. And I just thought to myself, I really want to go to Hawaii again. That was my thought. Like, just get me to Hawaii. I really want to go to Hawaii again. And I thought that a couple of times and I dropped it. And lo and behold, I'm going to Hawaii this summer because my parents wanted to take us on a family trip. So voila, one could say that I manifested that. And I relate to that idea. I think that can be true. What I guess comes up for me is that why not bring things into your life, magnetize towards things that bring you joy? The dilemma is, A, how do we do that? And then B, that many of the things we want, let's say, for example, we want to bring more love into our life. We want to bring the right partner into our life. We want to change our financial picture, can start to run up against some of our core beliefs and wounds. Some of the ones that it's like, we are so deeply programmed against that on like a primal level, on an unconscious level, that we can't seem to get past that to quote unquote manifest it. And that's usually where we then use it as a tool to beat ourselves up and feel shitty.
Yeah.
So one idea I really liked comes from the Hawaiian shamanism tradition. And the way that they see it is that you can manifest things, but it's kind of about what's available to you at any given time. So they said manifestation, instead of just, okay, Vanessa wants a Jaguar right now, it's almost like, did you plant the seeds that would allow a Jaguar to manifest? Because if not, maybe you can get a Hyundai and you can get almost there, but not quite. And they look at manifestation as like looking at a menu. Like, okay, well, what choices are available to me at this time? And that to me makes a lot more sense. Like, let's say Vanessa was like, I want to make $1 million this year. Well, I'll tell you what, I have not planted the seeds to make $1 million in 2016. According to them, that would actually limit my possibility. So, oh gosh, I have a lot of thoughts about this.
I know, me too. My brain's exploding in a variety of directions. But, one of them is going back to what you had brought up, which was, is it possible? So we're talking about that. And then should we focus our attention there? should I sit down and say, I want to make $1 million this year? Because what I find is, and this gets into the body stuff, right? Your body is this beautiful compass. And the more you can have a relationship with which most of us have little, or early developing relationships with our body, just because we're in a culture that is deeply disembodied. We don't have any point to relate to about what an embodied in-body culture might be like. But when you really have a relationship with it, it can navigate you places. And so what I find is that when I am interested in creating something from ego, which we all do all the time, gosh, I want my son to go to that private school. It would be so good for him. Gosh, I want the 3-bedroom house in my favorite neighborhood. I want my friend not to be sick. I want, all of these different things. We have longing all the time. It's just a part of the human condition. When I have a longing and my body goes into contraction mode, and this is extremely subtle. It's just this feeling of almost cellular hardening, or sometimes people will feel this is why we talk about gut feelings. Sometimes people will feel it as like solar plexus nausea or agitation or fatigue, inability to pay attention to your surroundings, like a little bit dissociated, all these things. This is a sign that probably you're focusing your attention on something that's not good for you. You're operating from your ego. You're operating from grasping towards something because you believe that if you have that thing, you'll be happier or a better person or the world will work out right. So Byron Katie, again, she says all the time, who needs God when we have your opinion? Who needs God when I have my idea that I'm going to make $1 million and then I'll be able to do all the things that I'm going to do and then I'll be happy. And no, actually, it really, whenever we're chasing something, we're not able to experience the deliciousness that really is here right now. And I'm saying this from a place, I think I've made it clear, and we've all been there, where I've experienced some real fucking shit, And it's not like I was skipping through fields of daisies and it was just so enjoyable to be suffering so intensely. But what I can say is that those things, those experiences have always, without doubt, if I'm willing to relate to them and to open to them, even though they're very painful, and to make the changes that I need to make to move away from them, whether that be, getting trauma therapy or ending a relationship or whatever, that those things really do uproot huge fields of karmic seeds for me to work with so that my life can become more delightful, so that source can flow through more. But it's that checking in. Do I feel ooh, I wish I could, have a Jaguar. I don't. But let's pretend that I do. If you contract, if you feel that grasping longing, and ease is really the opposite side of that coin. It's a feeling, it's a literal physical feeling of someone taking off a too tight suit jacket, of unzipping that. It's an unburdening feeling. It's feels so good. And I feel oftentimes that comes from me having a more awake relationship to reality. Not in a oh, I guess I have to just accept the fact that everything's going to be shitty, but more just noticing what's up right now. Like you were saying, what are the players at this particular moment in time for me? What are the options available? What are the things that are happening and unfolding right now? And the more I can relate to them in a very direct, present tense, kind, tender, affectionate way, then I have more of those experiences of just that unbinding of something. And it's that feeling of relief that I feel oftentimes we realize, I really don't even need that thing that I think that I thought I wanted so much. Maybe everything's just not such a big fucking deal. Maybe this desperation under the surface of things is what I need to start noticing more.
But are you saying that when you look at all available options and you experience that longing, that if you're in a place of ease, you actually can manifest something?
Well, I think this gets to the point of source and not knowing what's in my own best interest. I feel like something that feels like ease is directing me in a certain way, as opposed to grasping towards something. You know, like I can grasp towards some big work project, right? Like that feels great. You know, it's like, it's my work. I love my work. And I've decided I'm doing this big project. And it can feel like a lot of contraction, and it can feel like a lot of things get in the way of this actually coming into the world. And so I can either push through and decide I'm going to achieve, and I'm going to stay up all night, and I'm going to work with it, I'm going to make it happen. Or I can notice, like, this doesn't feel right. This is not working out. This isn't coming to pass. Like, so if I sit with this, if I just make space in my life, which, you know, for us is through embodied meditation, for clarity, then clarity can come through. And then maybe I get a nudge of like, you know, great idea, but this thing, like, nothing is what we think it's going to be. Very rarely, right?
Right.
And so maybe you thought this project was about the big win and success and the beginning of some new career chapter. But maybe actually it was about something completely different. It was about learning how to have a different kind of adult professional relationship. And you got a real opportunity to exercise that. And it's a total relief to like have that experience and to be able to turn towards something that feels more juicy. So that's where I feel like source coming through means that, like, yeah, I can create things, but maybe I'm not always, I need to listen and be receptive, as opposed to having this aggressive relationship towards reality. Like I need to fix it or make it the way I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, sure. And ease is one of the signs that we're actually flowing with something. You know, we're moving through something, which isn't to say there's no work involved, and yet it consistently feels right.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I feel like we are often conditioned away from our intuition. You know, in a civilization, it makes sense, never mind depending on, you know, the family that you grew up in. But we're often conditioned away from our intuitive, deep, embodied sense of knowing, of what feels right. Like even as simple as, do I want to eat right now or not?
Yeah.
And what do I want to eat? And am I tired or not? And so it's as simple as that, which we've all experienced. And it can get even more intense than that, depending on what life experiences you've had, where you're conditioned away from really being able to tune in and feeling into what feels good and easeful and right moment by moment, which I guess we could say would be like following your bliss, which I really love. The other thing that's coming up for me, that's reflecting on what you said, is I think so often when we're manifesting, it is coming from a belief of lack. Almost, let's say the opposite. Like, so let's say I'm sitting down and I'm vision boarding and I'm pasting images of a wedding on it or something, or love, and almost baked into that moment, it so commonly holds this idea that I won't get that. This idea that I am, you know, going to be deprived this by the universe. And hence, as you said, the desperation bakes. And one of the things I thought were really interesting from a Buddhist lens that I learned was they talked about karma. And if any of you haven't heard of karma, I'd be surprised. But, you know, karma is like you reap what you sow, right? And often we think about it in terms of negative consequences, like I do something bad and something unfortunate happens. But that's actually not the zhuzh of karma. Karma is really about like energy. So also, if I plant positive seeds, positive things grow. And you can use it both ways. And so one of the things that the teacher was sharing with us was, you know, if you plant these good seeds, like let's say, for example, you feel lonely in your life, you can go and you can help somebody else who might feel lonely. You know, if you want to build companionship and camaraderie, you go help someone else who feels lonely. And that's like planting the seeds of karma. And I thought, well, I mean, I was a healer forever, helping people, healer, quote unquote. I hate myself using that word. Don't use it, but you get it.
I get it.
But quote unquote. And I was helping people. And yet I felt extremely unhelped. I felt undernourished back. So I thought, well, how could that be, right? Here I am, I'm planting seeds, I'm doing what I can. But the teacher went on to say that it's not about the actions alone, that the potent energy, the alchemical agent was how you felt, the intention you brought to it, the attitude and intention you brought to the action, and then the feelings you experienced after the action. That was like the alchemical juice. And so it wasn't enough that you did, let's say, for example, this act of kindness where you showed up for someone who felt lonely. You had to feel great about it. And that's an interesting thing, because when I was stuck in my narrative that I was like giving more than I ever could get back, in my early years of working with people, I didn't feel great. I felt almost tired. I felt almost obligated. I felt weary. I felt almost subconsciously like, poor me, I'm putting out so much and I'm getting so little back. And like as if I was stuck in that kind of dilemma. So then that's what I planted. I planted seeds and I continued to feel that way. And so I think, yes, it's wonderful to manifest a trip to Hawaii and do it. Just don't think that's what's going to make you happy. It's going to be pleasurable. And you and I both love me some pleasure. And maybe it'll open a seed. But there's this other opportunity to reclaim yourself through embodiment, to tune in, to intuitively feel what's right. Because in that space, you always feel good. You feel, you feel aligned. You feel yes. And in that's what you're planting seeds of. And in a way, then, even if things don't manifest, like who cares? Because you feel right. But in a larger sense, my experience and certainly my theory is, and, I'll report back in a few months, but is that then you do create the most beautiful and sometimes unexpected things that are really and truly a match for you, not a match for the fear vibration that says, I'm never going to be happy.
Yeah.
So what if I get this? Maybe then.
Yeah, it's like becoming a really good dance partner with source. So it's not this bullying, pushing, shoving, grasping, striving, trying, Sisyphean kind of feeling. It's this delicious relationship. It's like a passionate love relationship that's deeply nourishing, where you're giving something like, hey, I'd like to go to Hawaii, but you're also receptive to, maybe the Hawaii trip's not going to be about yummy Hawaii. Maybe it's going to be about having a new experience of your family that you need to have. It's like, oh, okay, you're giving me the information.
Surprise, bitch.
That's what's up. Yeah, surprise, bitches. So that kind of dance of desire, like we're allowed to have desire. And I think that our individual selves and wishes and longings matter. We have them. They're okay. But also being receptive to what shows up. There's a book series. Maybe I mentioned this before already. I don't know, because it's like an image I use a lot. My son's into this book series called Fablehaven. That's all this mythical, magical, blah, blah, blah. But there's this one character who's terrible. So don't mind the character, but it's the image. So she's this witch who's been imprisoned, and she's in this shack in the middle of the woods. And the way she's imprisoned is that she's bound by several knots that kind of hold her in this shack. It's magical imprisonment. So what she does is she spends hundreds of years chewing on the knots. And so there's this description of them encountering her, and there's this crazy woman with all these knots, and she's literally just like, it's like blood and spittle wearing away at her teeth, chewing on these knots. Yeah, awful image. But what happens is that if somebody wants to have her do some magic for them, they can go and touch the knot and say, basically, I choose to release this knot. And then it just, bling, let's go. And for me, that was for whatever reason on the night that we read that together, such a potent image, because it really demonstrates that different internal feeling of chewing on the knot for hundreds of years and getting fucking nowhere versus being able to have some experience that really does feel like you can get into the flow where it just feels like something lets go, something unburdens because you're having this relationship with reality as opposed to just tugging on it.
Oh gosh, that's a really gruesome image, but I understand.
You know how I roll.
So light and upbeat on that one. No, I totally understand. You know, what's occurring to me as we're talking is that the hard part with this, okay, so it sounds so easy, follow your bliss and just go with ease. And I've actually been trying to be more present to that in a moment by moment way, like what feels right, what feels easeful. And I'm finding that a little challenging because I suppose we're not always so present. And also because the answers that come up may not be the answers you want. And what's arising is that I think a lot of the challenge, besides the fact that we're not always embodied enough to feel past what we think we should want and need into what's really deeply true, is that we have to trust. And this brings us back to that favorite Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche saying that you and I both love, which is trust your life. It all depends on how much you trust your life. And there is this real leap of faith, a real maturational leap that I think all of us human beings either have to make or will wind up frustrated by the same circumstances over and over again, which is that we can't control everything. There's a certain amount of surrender and trust, as if something right is moving through us, as if truth is maybe more important than a moment to moment pleasure. And I think that that is maybe easy in concept, but actually difficult in practice. That's been my experience anyway. I don't know. I'm curious to know your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think it's extremely hard for us to do. I'll speak for myself because that's the only person I should speak for. So on the one hand, we live in a culture where we're very conditioned away from ourselves. We're conditioned away from an experience of ourselves and a deep knowing and loving, tender relationship with feeling into ourselves. But on the other hand, we're in this extremely narcissistic culture. And so I think there becomes this fear of like, if I do just what, in the words of Kieran, Mystic Girl, what feels like the delicious yes in every moment, then I'm going to turn into a selfish bitch and I'm not going to take care of my child or clean my house. And I'm just going to, I don't know, like eat kettle corn all day. But the truth is that these things have to evolve in stages because it is, I find, infinitely, beautifully, and wonderfully complex. So I don't mean that in a hard way. I mean it in a really delightful way where you realize that there's so many layers of subtlety. So first, we have to build a relationship with ourselves, like a felt sense, compassionate, tender relationship with ourselves, which is always ongoing, certainly in my experience, and always evolving and deepening and maturing and ripening. And only from there can we start to tune into what is a delicious yes? What is a trusting of what comes up, of what I genuinely feel and want? And the truth is that oftentimes it is things like doing the laundry. That's a delicious yes in that moment. So it's very nuanced, but a really delightful relationship to cultivate. And I think it starts with feeling, being able to feel our bodies, not even like understanding our whole complex story, which I think many of us are pretty good at doing in this culture, but genuinely moment by moment feeling what you feel, not just emotionally, but physically. And those things are intertwined profoundly. But
you know, on a psychological level, most of us grow up feeling unsafe on some level in our earliest childhoods. And that can be for so many reasons, whether it's a literal story of like you actually were physically or emotionally unsafe, or whether it was experiential because you were sensitive to your environment or your parent was kind of checked out, or angry, or all sorts of things. But too often we don't experience ourselves as having a present, embodied parent. And so from the level of psychology, what they would say happens, the theory is that then we start to try to make ourselves omnipotent in order to feel safe. Well, for example, my father, let's say, has anger issues, and he'd come home from work and he'd be angry and he'd be screaming. If I was to think, wow, well, here's a man who doesn't have a lot of skill around how to handle emotion, which is the actual truth, and I was a child who could not escape it, that would make me feel powerless and stuck there. But if I was to conversely think, I must have done something to piss him off, I all of a sudden have a measure of power, because maybe, just maybe, I can figure out how not to piss him off and then make this like grossly overwhelming stimuli stop. And we go about that in many, many, many ways. I mean, even people who are narcissistic to the oomph degree, never mind the levels of relative narcissism, are said to have this primary wound. They somehow don't feel safe in their environment. So they build this omnipotent, I can handle, I am in control persona. And, I consider myself like I've said like reverse narcissist. Like I just thought I was the worst, but I still kind of imagined I have control over things. Like if I was good enough or pleasing enough or lovable enough, then everything would just work out. And you can see there's a lot baked into that. One is that I am in control. And therefore, when things aren't going perfectly as my ego brain thinks they should in my life, I am therefore bad. So it's a major dilemma. And the second is that life is going to look a certain way, is baked into it. Like that life ever can look not chaotic, as if that is the ideal version of life. So I think it's really common for us that we perceive ourselves to be in control in a way that's not, in order to feel safe. It's so basic, it's so fundamental. And that from that place, we start to go about manifesting. We start to go about vision boarding. We start to go about goal setting and striving and doing all of these things. But underlying all of that is this error that we are separate from everything. We are not inextricably interconnected to everyone and everything. And as you say, source or universe or God or whatever you all believe, that we're separate. 2 is that we do it all alone. 3 is that we know best and that we can control things. And 4 is this idea somehow that if we're not making the things happen in our lives that we deem appropriate, we are bad or unworthy. So that's a real trip. And it's so, for me, it's been so hardwired, and I see that often with people, that I think this idea of just, the old AA saying, like letting go and letting God, of beginning to surrender into the fact that maybe we don't know it all and we can't do it all and we're not alone and we're not separate. And that if we were to just be present and feel that things would evolve in a way that was right for us, even if it was like a learning experience. Because that's the thing. I think when you let go, it's not just that you're going to have bliss and daisies. It's that life is going to take you to the things you haven't healed, the things you haven't learned, the things that will get you to freedom and truth. And it's not always so easy along the way. So it's such a different thing than sitting down with my vision board, which I've done, and using my glue stick and going, oh, the universe must have given me these magazines with these pictures because it wants me to have X, Y, and Z, and then clipping it and feeling like, now I've done something productive and in control.
Absolutely. And so where do we find the ability to let reality unfold and to have a relationship and to find a safe space? Because like you said, like so much of this comes from feeling unsafe in the world or feeling overwhelmed by the world or feeling unworthy of the world. And so what do we do so that we can be available to reality as it arises? And, my opinion on that is that we can cultivate a relationship with our bodies And that becomes our safe space, not to wall off and not to disassociate, but to genuinely open so that things can move through and so that you know that old Buddhist saying, I'm sure I'm translating it in a faulty way, but that storms can't hurt the sky. So how do those storms move through without you trying to cultivate this, I'm the sky, and so I never feel anything. I don't feel angry. The goal is not to not feel emotions, and the goal is not to not suffer, quite frankly. It's to allow all of these things to rise and to find ways to sit with them and to know that none of us is ever done. As long as we're having a human experience, we're human beings. There's no one, not the Dalai Lama, not anyone, who's having an experience that's not a human experience.
Well said. I think the one thing that I'd like to kind of bring to the foreground before we wrap it up is just, we don't need to be nihilistic about this, and we don't need to be masochistic about this. If something is in your power to change it, change it. And if you wish for something, wish for something. None of this is about contorting yourself. You're not bad. Nothing is bad. It's all human. And it's actually all quite sacred. Our longings, our desires, our emotions, they're all really beautiful and wonderful and precious and sacred. So I just think having some compassion and openness around that and some understanding of our human nature and how all of these things are going to cycle through. And there is nothing wrong with manifesting. I mean, I have a dope ass trip to Hawaii coming up. Thank you very much. Like, if it's available to you, it will become available. I think it's important just to note that the dilemma itself that I think Brooke and I have both been getting to is that it's the erroneous belief that this will then make me happy, that this will solve all of my problems, that this will then finally make me safe and easy and never upset and never distressed and never messy and never chaotic, fill in the blank. And also the fear that we're separate and we're alone that really creates most of the problems around this. So manifest away, love bugs, if that's what you want. But hopefully this was some good food for thought for you.
Amen, sister.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any of the resources we may have mentioned throughout the episode, live at blissandgrit.com. If you go to that website and scroll down, you will see each episode's separate post, and the resources for each one are within there. You can also come play with us on the social media channel of your choosing. So we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, what have you. We are Bliss and Grit at all those spots, and that is a very handy way to communicate with us if you want to say hi, tell us how we're doing, tell us what your thoughts are on your path. If you want to support the show, you can write a review on iTunes or Stitcher, which helps us to let us know how we're doing. It also helps other people to find the show, which, considering that we're just getting the party started, very helpful. If technology is not your thing, but you are into the show, then please, I just ask that you tell your friends who you might think resonate with it that we exist. We are so very grateful for all that support. We'll be back next week, and thank you again so much.